They were Hollywood's golden idols, suave, stunning, and straight, or so the world believed. But behind the studio-made romances and picture-perfect lies were hidden passions, secret letters, and forbidden love stories the cameras never captured. In this video, we uncover 10 secret same-sex couples who risked everything for love and lived in the shadows to protect it. Some were silenced, some were erased, but all of them loved for real. He was the epitome of American masculinity, square-jawed, 6'4", with a smile that lit up every screen. Rock Hudson was Hollywood's ultimate leading man, adored by millions. But behind the facade of dreamy romances with Doris Day and glittering red carpet appearances was a truth he could never speak out loud. A truth that came crashing into the public eye when it was too late to control. Enter Marc Christian, a handsome, charming man nearly 2 decades Rock's junior. They met in the 1980s when Rock was already a legend and Marc was captivated by his presence. Their relationship, though hidden from the world, was intense and deeply affectionate. Rock showered Marc with gifts, introduced him to private Hollywood circles, and promised love without labels. To the outside world, they were simply close friends. But behind closed doors, they were a couple navigating the storm of a society not ready to accept them. The real heartbreak came not with Rock's illness, but with his silence. When he was diagnosed with AIDS, a diagnosis he kept secret until the press exposed it, he continued to live with Marc without disclosing the truth. After Rock's passing in 1985, Marc sued his estate, not for money, but for truth. His emotional testimony shattered the last illusions of Rock's carefully crafted image, revealing not just a closeted man, but a hidden love that had been silenced by fear. Marc Christian became more than a footnote in a Hollywood scandal. He was the man who dared to love a legend and demanded to be acknowledged, not as a secret, but as a partner. Their story remains one of the most emotional and controversial love affairs of Hollywood's golden shadows. A story of passion, silence, and the cost of hiding who we are. In the golden haze of 1930s Hollywood, Cary Grant and Randolph Scott were everything the studios wanted their leading men to be. Debonair, dashing, and dangerously charming. Women adored them, magazines praised their masculinity, and producers made sure their images stayed squeaky clean. But behind the doors of a sunlit beachfront house on the Pacific Coast Highway, another narrative may have quietly blossomed. They called it Bachelor Hall. A luxurious home where Grant and Scott lived together for over a decade, sharing not just space but laughter, routines, and possibly something far deeper. Publicly, they were roommates. Privately, the chemistry between them sparked rumors that refused to die. Photos from that era still circulate today. The two men lounging in matching swim trunks, sharing breakfast on the patio, trimming the Christmas tree side by side. These weren't staged studio shots, but candid, intimate moments that felt more like glimpses into a life shared than a publicity stunt. Whispers grew louder. Were these simply two close friends living together, or were they hiding in plain sight? Some insiders claimed to have read heartfelt letters between them, now long vanished. Others spoke of late-night parties and knowing glances. As the speculation intensified, studios allegedly stepped in, encouraging Cary to marry, not once, but 5 times, as a smokescreen for the truth. Despite the swirl of gossip, neither man ever confirmed the nature of their bond. Cary Grant brushed off the rumors with grace, calling Randolph Scott his best friend, while Scott eventually married and faded from the limelight. But for those who look closely at the photos, who read between the lines of studio contracts and bachelor pads, the story feels too rich to be coincidence. Was it just friendship? Or was it a romance too precious and too dangerous to ever name? Perhaps the truth lies not in the headlines, but in the quiet spaces between them, in a home filled with shared dreams, unspoken promises, and a love story Hollywood wasn't ready to hear. While Cary Grant and Randolph Scott captured curiosity with their beachside domesticity, Greta Garbo's story unfolded like a slow-burning poem, elusive, haunting, and written between the lines. Garbo, the silver screen's most enigmatic beauty, was a master of mystery. She once declared, "I want to be alone," and for the most part, she was. Fiercely private, emotionally withdrawn, and disinterested in the spotlight she so easily commanded. But then came Mercedes de Acosta, a playwright and socialite with a sharp pen and an even sharper intuition. Their connection was immediate and intense, one that left many wondering if the screen goddess had finally found someone who truly saw her. For nearly 2 decades, Mercedes and Garbo shared a complicated intimacy, marked by long walks, hidden holidays, and dozens of letters exchanged in secret. These weren't polite thank you notes. They were deeply emotional, sometimes desperate, always affectionate. Mercedes held on to those letters like sacred scripture, refusing to let time erase their bond. While Garbo remained silent, Mercedes's pen began to speak. In her later memoirs, she hinted at a relationship that went far beyond friendship. The revelation shook the illusion of Garbo's solitary life and outraged the star herself. Garbo ended their relationship in silence, furious at the public unveiling of something she had fought so hard to conceal. Today, those letters rest in the archives of the Rosenbach Museum, their contents both delicate and damning. They paint a portrait of 2 women caught in a tug-of-war between desire and discretion, love and legacy. Was Mercedes seeking truth or clinging to a past the world refused to acknowledge? Was Garbo's anger rooted in betrayal or fear that their truth might shatter her carefully crafted myth? As we leave behind their shadowed affair, we move toward another Hollywood icon who, like Garbo, built a fortress around her heart and perhaps let just one woman inside. Just like Greta Garbo, Barbara Stanwyck was a fortress, composed, controlled, and wrapped in quiet power. But where Garbo retreated into solitude, Stanwyck surrounded herself with strategy. Behind her poised demeanor and sharp eyes was a woman who mastered Hollywood's toughest game: survival. She rose from nothing, with no formal training and no famous connections, to become one of the most bankable and respected actresses of her time. And throughout her meteoric climb, one woman remained by her side: Helen Ferguson, her longtime publicist, confidant, and according to persistent whispers, something more. Ferguson was no ordinary handler. She was fierce, loyal, and famously protective of Barbara's image. While she shielded the actress from scandals and kept the tabloids at bay, rumors swirled that the bond between them ran far deeper than press releases and red carpets. They traveled together constantly, were rarely seen apart, and were even reported to live under the same roof for years. When Barbara's marriage to actor Robert Taylor crumbled, a union many considered a studio fabrication, Helen was right there to fill the emotional void. To the public, Ferguson was the friend who kept Barbara grounded. To those in the know, she was the quiet force behind the curtain, and maybe the one person who truly knew her heart. There were no love letters discovered, no dramatic public fallouts. Only decades of loyalty, fierce protection, and unspoken understanding. Hollywood's golden age was built on illusion, and perhaps Barbara and Helen were its most skilled architects, crafting a narrative that gave nothing away, yet said so much in silence. Were they just 2 career women bound by ambition? Or were they partners in a deeper, hidden life the world was not ready to accept? As we close the chapter on their guarded companionship, we open another, one where passion was undeniable, yet ultimately doomed by fear, ambition, and the brutal cost of being true in a time that punished truth. If Barbara Stanwyck and Helen Ferguson crafted their connection through quiet loyalty, then James Dean and Rogers Brackett existed in a different kind of storm. One fueled by ambition, dependency, and emotional complexity. Before James Dean became the cultural icon of teenage rebellion, he was just a broke, unknown actor in New York, sleeping on friends' couches and chasing auditions. That's when Rogers Brackett entered the picture. A polished, powerful radio director nearly twice Dean's age, with the means to change a young actor's life. And that's exactly what he did. Brackett helped Dean find a home, introduced him to casting agents, and pulled strings behind the scenes to jumpstart his career. To outsiders, it looked like mentorship, a generous man helping a lost boy. But to those who knew them intimately, it was far more personal. Whispers of a romantic relationship swirled through theater circles and old Hollywood lounges. Some saw Brackett's influence as a lifeline, others saw it as control. Dean, famously elusive and fiercely private, never confirmed or denied the rumors. But his raw intensity, both on screen and off, hinted at a life filled with contradictions. Fearless yet vulnerable, bold yet aching for belonging. Their relationship was never publicly defined, and perhaps that is what gives it such lasting intrigue. Was Brackett a savior, a lover, a shadow that haunted Dean's meteoric rise? The power dynamic between them raises uncomfortable questions, especially in today's lens. But what remains undeniable is the impact. Roger's Brackett helped build the James Dean the world fell in love with, even if he was quietly erased from the official story. As we leave this tangled bond behind, we step into another, one just as tortured, just as private, but lasting far longer than anyone ever expected. While James Dean burned bright and fast, Montgomery Clift flickered like a candle caught in the wind. Brilliant, vulnerable, and always on the edge of breaking. He was one of the finest actors of his generation, redefining masculinity on screen with a softness rarely seen in the era of stoic heroes. But off-screen, Clift wrestled with demons few ever saw. Addiction, trauma, and a desperate need for connection. Amid that chaos stood Jack Larson, best known to the public as Jimmy Olsen in Adventures of Superman. But to Clift, he was much more. A steady presence, a quiet shelter, perhaps even a lifeline. Their bond, though never publicly confirmed, was whispered about in tight-knit circles of Hollywood insiders. Clift and Larson spent years together, sometimes as friends, sometimes as something closer. After Montgomery's devastating car accident in 1956, it was Jack who reportedly helped care for him, both physically and emotionally. He offered not just companionship but patience, something Clift rarely found in a world obsessed with perfection. As Monty spiraled further into self-destruction, Larson remained nearby, never seeking the spotlight, never demanding credit. He loved in silence, perhaps because that was the only love Clift could accept. What makes their story so heartbreaking is its gentleness. There were no public outbursts, no bitter betrayals. Just two men trying to find peace in each other while navigating a world that gave them no space to be honest. When asked years later about Clift, Larson would only say he was one of the most beautiful souls he had ever known. Was it a friendship steeped in devotion? Or a romance the world was never meant to understand? As we leave behind this quiet love, we step into one far more volatile. A pairing so electric, it could never survive the spotlight. If Jack Larson offered Montgomery Clift a quiet kind of love, then Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins were caught in a storm. One where their feelings collided with fear, fame, and the crushing expectations of a world not ready to see them as they were. Both rising stars of the 1950s, Tab and Tony were young, handsome, and on the cusp of major careers. Their connection was as instant, their chemistry undeniable. In a different time, theirs might have been a love story for the ages. But in the Hollywood they inhabited, it became something they had to bury just to survive. They met through mutual friends, two young actors navigating the same pressures, living in the same shadows. They went on secret double dates, traveled under fake names, and found moments of freedom in borrowed apartments and back entrances. Tab once described their time together as full of laughter and warmth, but always surrounded by tension. The threat of being found out loomed over every moment. Studio executives pushed Tab toward fake romances with female stars, while Anthony was coached to be distant and aloof, anything to hide who he really was. Even among close friends, their relationship was treated like a ticking time bomb. The cost of hiding slowly tore them apart. Anthony, always more reserved and self-protective, pulled away under pressure, eventually entering a marriage that further buried his truth. Tab, years later, came out publicly and spoke of the pain of losing someone he truly loved to fear. "We just couldn't live openly," he said, his voice tinged with a sadness that never quite left him. Their love wasn't loud or long-lasting, but it was real, and it left a scar on both their lives. As we turn the page on this bittersweet romance, we enter another chapter. A chapter marked by the elegance, silence, and quiet presence of a man who defied every label Hollywood tried to impose on him. While Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins were torn apart by fear, Dirk Bogarde and Anthony Forwood quietly chose another path, one of loyalty, discretion, and decades of shared life behind closed doors. In the spotlight, Dirk was the quintessential British actor, suave, composed, and mysterious. But behind that polished facade was a deeply private man who spent over 40 years with one partner, his manager, companion, and perhaps the love of his life, Anthony Forwood. Though they never publicly acknowledged their relationship, their devotion to one another spoke louder than any headline ever could. They lived together for more than 4 decades, sharing homes in England and the south of France, nurturing gardens, raising dogs, and building a life few even knew existed. In a time when a public declaration could end a career, they mastered the art of subtlety. Forwood appeared in every photo op that mattered, always labeled as friend or assistant. But behind the labels was something far more profound. Forwood cared for Bogarde after his strokes, managed his career, and stayed by his side through every triumph and tragedy. They hosted quiet dinners, took long walks, and lived with the kind of intimacy that doesn't need words to be understood. Dirk Bogarde once wrote in his autobiography that he had never married nor ever lived with a woman, and left it at that, a quiet nod to a truth he was never allowed to name. After Forwood's passing in 1988, Bogarde was never quite the same. He retreated further into solitude, and in his later writings, traces of grief surfaced between the lines. Was it a romantic love? Was it a lifetime partnership hidden in plain sight? No one will ever know the full story, and perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. As we step out of their quiet world, we move toward another, a woman of few words and endless mystery, whose love life still haunts the history books. After the tempestuous flames of Dirk Bogarde and Anthony Forwood, we end our journey with a quieter, more haunting tale. One that unfolds not through scandals or public confrontations, but through loyalty, devotion, and the silent ache of a love never named. Ramon Novarro was once the Latin heartthrob of silent-era Hollywood, a rival to Valentino himself. But beneath the glitz of stardom was a deeply religious man, torn between his Catholic guilt and his truth. At his side for nearly 2 decades stood Herbert, journalist, publicist, and perhaps something more. Officially, Howe was Novarro's biographer and close friend. He wrote glowing profiles, carefully crafted interviews, and steered Novarro's public image with grace and subtlety. But those who knew them behind the scenes whispered that theirs was not merely a professional bond. They lived together for extended periods, traveled as companions, and built a quiet life far removed from the spotlight Ramon once commanded. Howe protected him, not just from the press, but from a world that would never understand a gay man's desire to be both devout and free. He helped Ramon balance the contradiction between Hollywood fame and a soul yearning for peace. There are no surviving love letters, no photos of intimacy, just quiet gestures, preserved memories, and a heartbreaking end. Ramon Novarro died alone, in tragedy, the victim of a violent crime that exposed his sexuality in the most brutal way. Herbert Howe was gone by then, but some say his absence marked the beginning of Ramon's decline. Was Howe merely a chronicler of Novarro's life, or was he the one person who truly knew the man behind the matinee idol mask? Their story is a final echo in this symphony of silenced love, tender, complex, and hidden in plain sight. And as the lights dim on this gallery of secret romances, we are left with a question: how many more stories like theirs were never told? They lived in secret, but their love still echoes through time. These weren't just movie stars, they were human beings who risked everything to love. If their stories moved you, subscribe to LGBTQ+ Vibes and share this video with someone who still believes in love that defies the odds. Because some romances may be hidden, but they were never forgotten.